In today's lecture, we're going to look at Russian art for the first time, art produced actually in Russia. And we'll start by talking about Russian collectors. In fact, many Russian collectors in the early 20th century were quite enamored with French avant-garde art. The most famous of these Russian collectors is Sergei Shukin, who owned over 200 works by 1914. He was the one who commissioned the dance and music from Matisse, works that we looked at in class. There are two versions of these, one in the Museum of Modern Art and the other in the Hermitage collection in St. Petersburg, Russia. Obviously, the ones in St. Petersburg came out of the Shukin collection. It was a massive collection, everything from Impressionism onward, and numerous works by Van Gogh, by Cezanne, by Monet. He had over 50 works by Picasso in the collection. Here are two of Shukin's Picassos. And while he was collecting these privately, he opened his home to the public on Sundays for anyone who wanted to come and see his art. And this meant, of course, that French modernism was particularly strong as an influence on Russian art as Russian art moves into the modern age, into the 20th century. This led directly to a Russian movement, a modernist movement called Rayonism, that was, founded by the husband and wife team of Mikhail Larionov and Natalia Goncharova. And in founding this particularly Russian variation on Cubist compositions, they talked about the fact that what they were trying to represent were rays of light, thus Rayonism. And they said in their manifesto for Rayonism that we don't see objects with our eyes, but rather what we see are, these are their words now, a sum of rays proceeding from a source of light. And what they tried to attempt to paint then were these rays of light that emanated from objects, rather than the objects themselves. What they said is that if we wish to paint literally what we see, then we must paint the sum of the rays reflected from the object. So we have to imagine that the colors that we see here are those rays of light that come off of the forest on the right and who knows what on the left, that these are rays of light refracted through, if you will, prisms, and becoming colors that emanate from the object itself to the canvas, to the eye, and thus represented on the canvas. The ideas of trying to paint the rays of light rather than the objects themselves may sound an awful lot like Robert Delaunay. And remember, he wrote a manifesto for his painting that eventually became labeled Orphism, on the power of light and how light can obscure the physical object. And we see that in the political drama where the color bands obliterate the physical forms. And certainly Goncharova and Larionov's Rayonism is doing the same thing, that we don't see the object itself, but we see the light that emanates from it, obliterating those objects and becoming just the light itself. So there seems to be a great parallel here, and certainly the Orphists, all of those post-Cubist movements were very, very strong in Russian collections, in Shukin's collection and others. Another major influence on Rayonism and Russian art in general were the Futurists. Larionov and Goncharova started Rayonism after having heard a lecture by Marinetti. He had gone on tour, he had been to Russia, given a lecture there, hearing some of his ideas about how art can propel us into the future, propel us into the modern world. Goncharova and Larionov then decide at that point to start Rayonism. I don't know if I mentioned that they were married as well, worked sort of elbow to elbow quite often. Larionov and Goncharova went on to found